Good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome to everyone for joining this session today. I'm delighted to be hosting this session, which is entitled Lessons of Locally Led, What Can We Learn from Tropical Cyclone Harold, and also more broadly, women's leadership in the Asia-Pacific region. It's great to see many familiar names in the participant list. For those that don't know me, my name is Peter Walton, and I am the CEO of CARE Australia, an organisation that seeks to defeat poverty and also achieve social justice. But critically, gender equality is at the heart of everything we do and everything we seek to do. I'm also a passionate campaigner for the international development and humanitarian sector and system to fundamentally reform and become much more genuinely locally led. And this session, in many ways, brings together those two areas, in essence, the intersection of gender equality and localization. So being locally led and also supporting women's leadership, two areas where significant shifts are really required. But let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, albeit virtually and physically dispersed, unfortunately. But let's take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the traditional lands on which we convene this conversation today. We acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of all the land we work and live on, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and deep respect. And I acknowledge that the sovereignty of this land was never ceded. So thank you to the panel members who will be joining this conversation today, Celeste Barroso and also Charlie Damon. And I will introduce them both more fully in due course. And also thank you to all in the audience. It's great to have you here. Each of us will speak initially, and then we will have time for question and answer session at the end. If I can ask my colleague Ros just to start sharing the slide deck, please. And if we can go to slide 2. So if we go to slide 2, let me begin by setting out, I guess, the context for today's discussion. Gender inequality is a key driver of poverty and one of the most widespread forms of injustice in the world. But critically, gender equality will never be achieved while women have fewer economic rights, have less control over economic resources and less access to economic opportunities than men. And, you know, whilst I sense that I may be preaching to the converted here a little bit, let me just outline what that means. Statistically, you are more likely to be living in poverty if you're a woman. 1 in 3 women globally has experienced physical or sexual violence. Worldwide, women continue to be in the lowest paid work. 60% of chronically hungry people in the world are women and girls. More than 2/3 of the world's illiterate people are women. And women are disproportionately impacted by the impacts of climate change. So gender equality is fundamentally an issue of social and economic justice. And when we think about the intersection of locally led and gender, and especially in the humanitarian context, this injustice is really stark. Women and children in this region, Asia Pacific, are 14 times more at risk of death and injury in an emergency and its aftermath than men. I find that a deeply appalling statistic. Research by the UN Women in the Pacific, however, has highlighted that this awful statistic can be drastically reduced if women's socio-economic status is improved. Women and girls are the hardest hit by conflict and disasters. Women are also often the first to respond to meet the needs of their families and their communities. So despite this, women affected by crisis often have little or often have no influence over the design and the delivery of humanitarian assistance. And this matters because women have a right to have a say over the decisions that affect their lives. It also matters, in my view, because women's participation, without women's participation, humanitarian assistance often does not meet women and girls' needs and can actually even reinforce gender inequalities and cause great harms. So we will be talking about the Asia Pacific region more broadly, but let me start by talking about the Pacific community. Even in the Pacific community, where women often hold traditional titles and where there is matrilineal ownership of resources in many places, such as land, community decision-making continues to be dominated by male traditional leaders. Women are often found in very small numbers in community decision-making bodies, especially around consultations on disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. This underrepresentation really does mean that they are less likely to receive the critical information for preparedness and actually also be able to influence decisions for better humanitarian preparation and response. CARE's experience in humanitarian activities has demonstrated the essential role of women's leadership in disaster risk reduction for reducing the disproportionate death and injury caused by women and children in emergencies, and certainly in its aftermath. However, based on the analysis of a lot of OECD data, CARE has found that despite promising multilateral, individual donor, UN agency initiatives, most OECD donors have fallen well short in terms of meeting many of the gender markers that they've agreed to. And that's including increasing funding to women's groups, especially in fragile and conflict affected states, and also not ensuring that they are sufficiently funding gender equality programs. Sadly, while the COVID-19 pandemic has threatened reversing even modest gains made to date, the World Economic Forum recently has stated that they feel that COVID-19 has potentially led to a generational reversal in gender equality gains. And it's 26 years since the Beijing Declaration. And sadly, not one country in the world has achieved all of the markers of gender equality. And not one, and sadly, 90% of countries around the world still have at least one law which discriminates against women. Here in Australia, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is one of the better performing donors, but still falls well short. So it is time, it is, I would argue, overdue that we need to, in both these areas, the concept of being genuinely locally led and genuinely addressing issues of gender equality, especially and including around women's leadership. It's time to turn the rhetoric into reality. And this is where our discussion takes us today. It's the need to do more to support local civil society, especially women-led organizations, and the need to genuinely shift power to support local and national actors. If we could go to the next slide, please, Ros. So CARE Australia is seeking to address these issues in many ways. We are committed and have a very clear programmatic or strategic objective to make sure that all of our programming is as local as possible and led by those most impacted. This includes making sure that our programming framework is designed and universally applied to ensure that local actors are the primary decision makers and resource holders, and that locally led programming is prioritized, enabled, and strengthened. It means also recognizing that we don't operate as an island, ensuring that our advocacy and influencing agenda is also supporting local actors to influence the behavior and the decisions of key stakeholders. And that also applies to us and our influence of our broader CARE family, and indeed the donors that support the work that we seek to do. And it also means challenging our own country officers to ensure that they transition to what more locally led models need to look like in support of our overarching mission. And it really talks to the role of complementarity. One such area which is a step in the right direction in this space is the CARE Women Lead in Emergencies initiative. This program is really, I guess, a practical toolkit for frontline workers to promote diverse women's participation and leadership in humanitarian settings. It is a program that supports women in communities at the front line of conflict and disaster to overcome many of the barriers to their participation and to lead in meeting the needs of their communities. Women Lead in Emergencies brings tried and tested approaches from development programs all around the world and into our humanitarian response to enable women to identify their own priorities and act on them, to put decisions on how to spend program funds in the hands of women and local organizations, to support them to engage with community leaders, governments, and humanitarian agencies to access rights, services, and assistance, and also enable women's participation in preparation for future disasters to really shift the cycle. So without further ado, to talk more about this, I'm delighted to introduce Celeste Barroso. Celeste is the lead coordinator for the Women Lead in Emergencies project in the Philippines and has worked as a project officer there under the same project with CARE Philippines. Prior to this, Celeste was the program manager of a women's rights organization where she handled projects with a strong focus on gender and development and girls' rights and education. She's worked with the Philippines Survey and Research Center and is a graduate with a major in sociology from the University of the Philippines. And she's currently studying for her master's degree looking at women and development at the same university. So a very, very warm welcome to Celeste, and let me pass to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. So I am here to present about Women Lead in Emergencies here in the Philippines. Can everybody hear me clearly and see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So as Peter introduced earlier, Women Lead in Emergencies supports women in communities at the front line of conflict and disaster to be able to overcome barriers to their participation and to take the lead in meeting their own community needs. So what is new about Women Lead? We definitely have a specific focus on the voice of women and how they can engage in leadership. And of course, we definitely want to help women take the lead when it comes to emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. And we want to put the money and decision in the hands of women directly affected by the humanitarian crisis. And of course, we want to provide the practical tools and guidance for the frontline humanitarians. So last year, these have been successes of the pilot run of Women Lead in the Philippines. We were able to engage over 600 women leaders in 29 women's groups from 27 different barangays across the municipality of the three islands of the Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Together, we were able to come up with 28 women's action plans, and we were able to indirectly impact the population of these communities, that is almost about 50,000 people, and we were able to conduct over 70 activities altogether across the country, which in result, we had 3 reports on rapid gender analysis on power and 4 audiovisual knowledge products of our women's stories. What does Women Lead do exactly? So this is the model. We have 5, they're not really steps because this is a circle and they work and interact with each other, but I'm going to start with reflect. Reflect, wherein the staff, partners, and women groups and men reflect on social norms about voice and leadership. This is very important because we want to promote from our own organizations that the change that we want starts from us. So we cannot just implement these projects as organizations without the awareness that there are these inequalities that are happening. Next is the analyze, which is the participatory analysis of gender, power, and public decision making. This is where we conduct the rapid gender analysis that we have so that when we go into the communities, we are able to assess where the interventions that we should do. And next is the co-create, wherein we facilitate women's groups to identify the barriers to participation and leadership and strategies to change them. And the act, wherein we fund and support women's own empowerment strategies and priority activities. And lastly is learn, wherein the participatory action learning to reflect on what is working and adapt. Women Lead is actually an action research model wherein we do implement projects, but at the same time, we definitely want to learn from everything that we're doing. So we actually have 6 principles. We have the women acting with women, women decide, do no harm, meet women where they are, and of course, we want to increase quality and not just the quantity of participation. And lastly, we definitely want to transform unequal power and decision-making structures. Let me just fixate on my favorite here, which is the meet women where they are, because it is important to know the context of the women that you are helping. Here in the Philippines, we have different religions and very much different communities where women have different access to resources. And when it comes to this, it definitely shows that women have different stages in their lives wherein it's not all the same for every community, for each woman. So that is very important in the co-creation and act process from the model that I just mentioned earlier. So how do we do women lead? We let women take the lead through our women's action plans. We let women in these mini projects to decide what issues matter to them, what change they want to see in a few months, and how they make this happen. So they have these women action plans, wherein these are the agenda that the members of our women's groups carefully planned and prepared and worked on, that is funded by Care Philippines and embedded with the organization's existing projects. So given that there are different issues for each of the women's groups in their community, this varies per community, per site, and per project. And these are solely dependent on the causes and issues that our participants want to address. So just a few examples of our action plans from year one. One of the specific issues addressed by our women's group there was the lack of safe spaces for women to convene, especially during situations of emergency. So they decided to build a multi-purpose center. And next is due to the lack of access to safe and potable water, one of our women's groups have decided to address this issue and help create a water system infrastructure, of course, with the special cooperation of their local government unit. And for organizations to be able to mobilize, especially during circumstances that requires assistance from them, a formal recognition from the required institutions were one of the issues that was addressed last year. Next would be the establishment of women's organizations, wherein to be able to address the community welfare as a united front of women. One of the action plans from last year was that they established a women's organization to help with their community needs as women. And lastly, the provision of emergency kits, supplies, and training. As part of the emergency and resilience response, one of our women's groups found that trainings and provision of supplies were the perfect action plan as they led the organization for these projects. So in statistics, the issues that were addressed by our action plans were women's organizing, climate crisis, safe spaces education, especially education and internet connectivity, access to water, peace and security, community health and welfare, and livelihood. And over half of the action plans and issues that were addressed were about livelihood because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And most of the themes of our women's action plans were retailing actions, procuring necessary nebulizers and medical kits, and establishing their associations. And also about 17% built the physical and social structures, such as gardens, herb gardens, community gardens, and water systems. So after the women lead activities, when asked if they were confident in their own individual and collective ability after 6 weeks of the co-creation process, 88 to 97% women agreed, and about 88 to 92% of women reported that they were comfortable attending and speaking up during communities and that they felt heard by their leaders and other stakeholders in these spaces. And 4% more women felt that they had a formal or informal leadership in the community. Next, 91% of women reported that they can collaborate as a community to improve their quality of life. And 1% more women reported feeling more confident that they can achieve goals in their personal lives, while 2% were less confident that they can use knowledge and information gained to implement actions and influence change in their community. Next is that 88% of women reported that they can collaborate with other members of their community to address a community need. So for Women Lead Year 2, we actually aimed to start with 7 areas, but unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic travel restrictions and other issues in these areas, we were only able to proceed with 5. So as of now, we already have proposed action plans, and these are a few examples. We have GBV watch groups, and along with this, the women's groups decided to have training, seminars, and even distribute survivor kits that contain pamphlets, whatever they thought that would be best to address gender-based violence in their community, to be able to raise awareness about women's rights when it comes to gender-based violence. Next is medical missions and life support trainings. And since we did have a number of women's groups composed of barangay health workers, and with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, some of the action plans focused on community health and found it essential to have different trainings and medical missions for their communities. There was also materials procurement in partnership with local government units, wherein they formulated their own mode of agreements actually with the usage of materials that they decided to procure for their community. Next is the leadership and financial literacy and DRR trainings. As part of their own growth, our women thought that it would be best for themselves to be able to have trainings and use these learnings to help develop their action plans. And there has been a boom in the community pantries in the country recently. And one of our women's groups thought that the funds for their action plans would help their community through instant provision. And lastly, the provision of supplies for the community during lockdowns. Recently, I was reached out to by one of our area leaders to ask if it was okay to use the WAP fund for them or to give ayuda or help to the community that has undergone lockdown yet again here in the Philippines. And these contain canned goods, any noodles, rice, and other food that can be easily cooked so that they don't really have to go out anymore since they are not allowed to. So that's it. You can definitely spot the difference between the action plans of year 1 and year 2, right? And not only did they receive more resources for year 2, but a quite intense deep dive and reflections have been conducted so that the issues of their action plans could go beyond what is surface. In essence, the incompetence of the government in handling the pandemic, and our own communities looking out for their health, and women looking out for other women, hence the initiatives for gender-based violence. So how do we do it? We include activities that have different modules on gender and development, and most especially Empowerment 101, wherein we talk about awareness raising and conscientization. So we asked them specifically these questions. What were your families or communities' beliefs as to what the role of women are? How should women act? What women should be doing? What were the beliefs of men's roles? Do you think that this should be the same for women? Why not? And do you think our society is gender equal? Because we are aware that each and every woman have different contexts in their own lives, but once talked about in a group and community level, realizations that what they may encounter individually is apparently a social issue, as many of them experience such in various levels. With such gender inequality present, how do you think women in other marginalized communities are affected differently during crisis? We also specifically asked them this question to help them realize why women lead in emergencies exist and how women, children, and other marginalized communities are definitely affected differently during crisis and emergencies. As women take part in movements for social change, in the process, they gain a changed awareness of the world. Through that, they would get a reinterpretation of social reality wherein they begin to challenge the way society works, experience a release from old social arrangements and restrictions, and go through an awakening. As women who engage in movements confront their dominators, their experience of conflict alters their conscious awareness of the nature of the social order and the social meanings within it. This change in consciousness is referred to as the reinterpretation of social reality. And the reinterpretation of social reality and the accompanying consciousness of a desire for change is needed to the social transformation sought by the group. So through our women's action plans, we definitely think that we can address such inequality, especially in the context of emergencies, and include all those in need in the picture. So technically, why do we organize women? Well, the thing is, there's less female participation in existing community organizations due to the social expectations and beliefs on women's primary role in the family, and more male participation, leadership, and decision making in community organizations. And definitely, of course, we want to teach our women's groups how exactly they can use the gender lens and be feminist advocates for all. So we want to teach them on what exactly is a feminist organization. And we have a short checklist. Maybe if you're part of an organization, you can say that your organization is feminist if it ticks all these four boxes. So does your organization emphasize on the importance of mutual caring, support, cooperation, interpersonal relationships, personal growth, development, and empowerment? And does your organization have an internal and external action agendas aimed at improving women's status or opportunities in society? Is political analysis of women's oppression a part of the action agenda? And lastly, are the members transformed by participation in the organization? And does the participation change them subjectively or materially? Last is on building partnerships. We definitely think that it is important for us to build partnerships to maximize the potential of our projects. So we ask them to think what are the best practices that they can think of to involve the following in their action plans, such as the barangay offices, local government units, and definitely other members of the society. Next is, why is it important for men and boys to be included in the narrative? And how do we ensure their participation, and what specific activities and roles do men have in their action plans? And it is important, definitely, to include men and boys in the picture, as the only way to achieve gender equality is to have the participation and support of everyone, regardless of gender. It is not a competition. We do not want to get ahead, but we simply want to be on the same level. So I just have a short video of the year one and testimonies of our women from last year. So are you ready to hear it?
Yes.
Across the world, with over half of the countries, existing gaps between men and women remain at a wide margin, be it with salaries, leadership in political and economic spaces, and denial of land and property rights. Regardless of laws put in place, women are still set aside in politics and public decision-making, remaining powerless and disregarding the existence of their rights, voice, and needs. What does it mean to have power? Having power means that a certain person, structure, or institution is held at a higher position over another, giving them the capacity to heavily influence, if not decide, on important life and death situations. Women Lead in Emergencies is an initiative of CARE that aims to amplify women's voices and participation in decision-making during crises and emergencies. It works with different groups and organizations led by women to work towards empowering women and girls within their communities. Through activities focused on extensive gender development, women empowerment, leadership, and skills trainings, Women Lead nurtures women's participation and leadership in formal and informal decision-making spaces. Under other CARE projects, Increase and NCD Love, and with PKKK, Women Lead was able to engage more than 300 women leaders across 5 provinces, resulting to over 2,000 beneficiaries for projects supporting women's leadership and collective action during emergencies.
Mayroon tayong tinatawag na gender orientation. Doon siyempre sinukat din yung pag-unawa ng mga kababaihang IT kung ano ba yung gender, at mas lalo nilang naintindihan din na iba-iba yung yung aspeto ng gender.
Ang babae ang gihapon patungo sa komunidad. Nagpapasalamat at ng mga taga-care, mga sila nagtandak si meeting. Nagpapasalamat at nagbayang pansin mga emergency care. Dahil si Tambulit sa amin kahit
lagi ako nagkukulong sa loob ng pamamahay namin. Parang hindi ko na alam kung ano ang dapat kong gawin. Pero nang maka-attend ako ng mga seminar tulad ng WLIE, na parang na-express ko ang sarili ko na pwede pala akong lumabas na makipag-usap kung kani-kanino. At saka may halaga pala ako. Yun talagang pinakamalaki na may halaga pala ang buhay.
Siyempre, as a mother na ako yung gumagawa ng totoong desisyon. So, napakalaki talaga ng improvement na moment late sa aking buhay. Kasi, kung baga, na-express ko yung kung ano ako at kung ano yung kailangan ng community sa akin. Importante talaga yung gender equality na may patupad. Kasi, lagi kaming binabatikos na mga kalalakihan, bakit ganito, ganyan. So, malaki yung halaga ng gender equality dito sa amin. Gusto kong makita sa mga kababayan, marinig ang boses nila. Saka, kumbaga sa mga lalaki, makapantay na kami.
Sana tuloy-tuloy na yung ginagawa namin para sa kabutihan ng lahat. At ipakita nila na kung ano talagang kaya ng mga kalalakihan ay kaya rin ng mga kababaihan. Hindi magpapatalo yung mga kababaihan. Yung gusto.
We are the we in power, and we put the women in empowerment. When we empower women, they can fully realize their potential and their capability to have power and control over their lives, without the restrictions of gender inequality. Empowered women influence important decisions that affect their lives, which in turn allows everyone, regardless of the gender, to thrive.
Thank you so much, everyone. That would be all from me. Over to you again, Peter.
Hey, thank you so much, Celeste. It's so good to have your insights and for sharing more information about that initiative. I'm not sure about everybody else watching and attending virtually, but every time a video pauses, I'm holding my breath thinking, please continue, please continue. Hey, thank you so much, Celeste. That's great. And you'll see in the chat, there's some sort of comments thanking you for your insight. And I'd encourage everyone to keep putting comments in. And indeed, if you start to form questions for Celeste, Charlie, or myself, please start making a note of those. So we're going to shift a little bit now. If we can put the other slide deck up, please, Ros. And then it's really around going a little bit deeper into the concept of locally led. So many of you, of course, would be familiar with the term localization, even if there's a plethora of definitions and conceptions and misconceptions around what it means. I certainly prefer to use the term locally led, and not least in an era where the international humanitarian and development and humanitarian sector is sort of really needing to lean in and address issues of decolonizing and being genuinely anti-racist. I think the term locally led better describes the intent. And for me, being locally led really means recognizing, respecting, and strengthening the independence of leadership and decision-making by local and national actors to support affected communities. So in essence, it's fundamentally about power and indeed the shifting of power. And I think it applies as much in the development space as it does in the humanitarian space, despite what is often that unhelpful development humanitarian dichotomy. But at its core, I would say it's also about a willingness for international non-governmental organizations and donors to change themselves, to play a very different but complementary sort of intermediary role So as local as possible, as international as necessary is a phrase that, obviously emerged after the World Humanitarian Summit. So when disasters strike, local leaders, really should have some control, all control around what decisions are made in terms of how a response should be led. And as Celeste was really highlighting, that's got to involve women leadership as well. Certainly in the Pacific, there are, I guess, a range of examples and so many lessons in recent years around the important shifts that we and many, many others are calling for. In 2015, I was personally sort of really almost profoundly impacted by Tropical Cyclone Pam in Vanuatu, and impacted because at the time I was leading the International Division of the Red Cross, and I was sort of very alarmed that, over 130 international organizations descended, all with good intent, on a country with around 260,000 people. The good intent is great, but, the way that played out, actually caused a lot of harm. There was disruption to the local economy. There was bypassing of local organizations and businesses. Many of those organizations had never worked in Vanuatu before and actually used a crisis like this as a point of entry. And I recall a Pacific Islander at the time saying, commenting on the international system with the quote, "At times of disaster, what we need is a locally made canoe, but what we get is a battleship." And it really resonated with me, and I guess started a very sort of changed mindset in my own leadership around the role of international organizations. Interestingly, in contrast, Tropical Cyclone Harold last year, also a Category 5 cyclone, hit Vanuatu. But it was a year, obviously, as we all know, when the international surge system was brought to its knees. People couldn't flood in, they couldn't go in because of the pandemic. But it was also interesting because it was a Category 5 cyclone in our region that barely made a ripple in the news cycle, all because of COVID. So here to talk about this and many other lessons from the Pacific, may I introduce my colleague, Charlie Damon. Charlie is the program manager with the Pacific Regional Program for Care. She's managed CARE's disaster response in support of local organizations, Cyclone Pam in 2015, Cyclone Winston in Fiji, Cyclone Gita in Tonga. Too many cyclones. So if there's anyone denying climate change out there, we've got some good evidence for you. She has extensive experience managing gender sensitive and transformative development and humanitarian programming across the Pacific. So a warm welcome to you, Charlie, and over to you.
Thank you, Peter. So first I'll talk to you a bit about our work in Tonga, and then we'll go on to talk about Cyclone Harold and its comparison to Cyclone Pam in terms of that local-led response. So Cyclone Gita hit Tonga in 2018. We had previously been working with partners in Tonga on their disaster preparedness. So we had been there already in 2017 to look at what partners, through the Live and Learn network, what partners were there, who would be wanting to work with us in the event of a disaster, and we set out already what the roles and responsibilities would be. And essentially looking at, we have a network of local organisations who are already in place. What we can bring to the table is any technical support required and also that access to donor funding. And then, of course, what our local partners bring is those existing community networks, existing government relationships, and essentially building on their strengths and their existing programming to see how we could respond. So for Cyclone Gita in Tonga, we did a response in WASH, food security, agriculture, and shelter. And then we also did a pilot for the Women Leading Emergencies. Next slide, please, Ros. So the Women Leading Emergencies was just a concept at that stage with Care International. And when Cyclone Gita hit, we were approached to see if we could pilot the concept and just look at how it would work or not work. And so we allocated some very small funding to this pilot in our existing grants, and over a very short time frame, which is actually quite interesting when we go to talk about the findings of that. So in terms of the process, very similar to what Celeste described. We consulted, we went to Awa Island, We consulted with some, they were existing women's groups, but they were dormant. So they had been established, but they hadn't been supported, but they had an existing structure in place. So they already had a chair, a treasurer and a secretary, and they had a bank account. We consulted with those women's groups to determine what were their outstanding needs from Cyclone Gita, and how would they like to respond to those? What activities would they like to do to enable their response? We then went back about a month later to confirm those needs. And then we started to mobilise the support they required. Awa Island is a small island, doesn't have any access to supplies other than the odd sort of small shop. So everything was purchased from the main island of Tonga WLIE and then sent over to Awa. And then a few months later, we did our endline survey and evaluation. Next slide, please, Roz. And what was interesting, particularly because it was such a short time frame, were when we did our endline evaluation, what we found was that short-term inputs can make a difference. So despite only having a 6-month period, essentially, where we were in full implementation of this, women's groups were, they were creating their own food systems, they were gathering their own income, they were using the bank accounts. One of the women's groups had been employed by the district council to do some gardening for the council. So already their role in recovering from Cyclone Gita had been strengthened, even though it was just a short-term input that we were able to provide through the project funds. The types of activities that they did, very similar to what Celeste described, mostly around food security and agriculture and income generation. And then we were therefore, because our project was so short, able to link them with ongoing support from other services. The timing of when you establish the Women Lead in Emergencies project is really interesting. So we had done some consultations not long after Cyclone Gita, and then we'd gone back just to cross-check everything that we had collected, and actually needs had changed. So if you start some of this stuff too soon, normally communities and women are very consumed with that. We need clean water, we need food, we need shelter. So actually, if you wait for those initial needs to be met before going, it's more beneficial, because then you enter that recovery phase and can really look at that rehabilitation recovery action that women are able to lead and benefit from. It should be conducted alongside other response activities, and this is mostly so that you can meet those other needs in other ways, but also because you have the space, you have the relationships, and you have the resource in place to enable the project to be conducted. And then working with existing women's groups and structures really helps in terms of sustainability, and particularly with response programs, you're normally on a short time frame. It means you're working with existing things. You're not trying to establish something new right in the guts of trying to start your emergency response. The provision of ongoing support to women's groups is really critical, and it was so interesting listening to Celeste's presentation, where with a 2-year time frame, you can see so much happen for these women, whereas for us we only had 6 months, and I felt like we were just getting to a point where we could see some really positive things happen. But unfortunately our donor funds came to an end, our response program came to an end, so we instead linked them to other organisations who were going to be continuing there with their long-term programming to enable that support to go to them. We found that with the women's groups that we were working with, there wasn't much representation of women with disabilities. And so what we found was that really on the outset, when you're establishing this kind of project, as with any response action, really beneficial to work alongside the disabled persons organisation, so you can really target that support to women with disabilities also. And to include men and boys in the engagement strategies, and Celeste spoke to that already, sort of that decision-making space is mostly held by men, and by facilitating women's voice in that space, but enabling men to be across what's happening, really creates a positive relationship. And during our endline, we really found the men also being very positive about the outcomes for women, because essentially if women are earning, if women are able to be more self-reliant, it benefits their family, benefits the community. And then finally, to employ dedicated staff who are committed to gender equality. So we were very fortunate to be able to work alongside the Red Cross coordinator, Meliane Mahe, who had lived and worked on the island of Awa for a number of years, and was committed to women's voice, women's rights. And so by having her as the main community mobiliser for this project really helped with that networking, with that monitoring, with ensuring that the voice was being heard in the right way. And so certainly something to consider if employing this type of response action. Next slide, please. So as I said, so with our end line and our evaluation, positive results essentially for the Women Lead in Emergencies, but also for the response action that we took with Live and Learn Environmental Education and with Māori Tonga Trust. So the Māori Tonga Trust are traditionally an agriculture NGO, very male dominated, and for Māori, that Cyclone Gita was the first time they had considered gender. When we first started with them, they didn't have any female staff, they didn't have any female toilets in the office, and now we're still working with them with our longer term programming, and they now have now up to like 15 female staff, which is incredible, plus they're requesting gender training, plus they've now got in place, prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, and a number of policies which can only benefit their program, the communities they work with. And so whilst normally for gender work, the view is to work with women's organisations and feminist organisations, the evaluation found that actually by working with an organisation that has very large community reach, you can make quite a difference if you help them employ that gender lens, noting that of course that takes time, and so we have been working with them for 3 years now and can see the changes, but we're by no means done. Next slide, please, Ross. So Meliana unfortunately can't be with us today because the internet connectivity on AWA isn't reliable. So she's just recorded a short message about the Women Lead an Emergency project for us.
Hello. In February 2018, the most strong tropical cyclone Gita, Category 5, hit our island Ewa in the Kingdom of Tonga. Lucky that the CARE International came with their rescue team to help throughout our communities. They focused on women and girls who were badly affected by this incident, which they were the most vulnerable group in our society. They outreach by visiting home and women's groups in every communities. They did consultation and reassess to specify the impacts of an issue affecting women, which they help to uphold the dignity and their rights by encourage them to voice out their consent and make sure that they were not left behind, and to stand up and make a difference and to be more resilient. By doing some activities planned on how to help their families' financial income and not to rely on the man or the head of the family, as in Tonga, the father is always the head of the family, as he is the one who has the responsibility for the family, not only the family but also the communities. The women's groups can help the men contribute to the developments of the society and to be more resilient. The outcome of this project, the outcome of the consultation which were activated by the CARE team, they received various donations assisted by the CARE team, which were very helpful to start a new projects. Some women's groups started up their own activities, which helped their families and also their communities. For example, some women's groups started up vegetables garden, which help with their families' food, and also they sell in the market for their financial income. Some women's groups started up showing activities and were benefited by both their families and the group's income. Other women's groups, they were donated with cooking equipments. They did the same, and many others. What is happening now? These women's groups and girls still continue working together, and some individuals, women, started up their own businesses, and it is very working well. We are very happy with the outcome of the hard working of this CARE team in rescue us from the impact of these strong tropical cyclones. And on behalf of the women and the girls of Ewa, I'd like to thank you, to express our sincere thanks to this care team for your helping hands and reaching out as women and girls in the difficult time of the tropical cyclones. Malo.
Thanks to Meliane. So Cyclone Harold hit the Pacific region last year. Whilst the world was in lockdown and being affected by COVID, this Category 5 cyclone hit Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, Tonga and Fiji. And the international response system couldn't deploy its usual surge personnel. So it really provided an opportunity for national actors to launch their own response, and so we did it in Vanuatu, and in Solomons and Fiji our partners did so too with some remote support. Cyclone Harold hit just 5 years after Cyclone Pam, was the same ferocity for Vanuatu as Cyclone Pam. However, the response was quite different. As Peter mentioned earlier, for Cyclone Pam there were 130 organisations that flew in and a huge number of staff. I was living in Vanuatu at the time. It really was incredible to see the level of personnel that were being flown in. And for Cyclone Harold, this was not possible. So organisations were reliant upon themselves and those who were already in country. So for CARE, we deployed a number of strategies to respond to this. We have our country office there, and we already had some programs on some of the islands that had been affected. And so really it was that provision of remote support, but also acknowledging that for a lot of our national staff, many of them had already been part of the Cyclone Pam response, had been engaged in numerous response, preparedness and response activities, and know these islands better than anyone flying in, and so are in a position to be able to mobilise, to conduct needs assessments in partnership with communities and so on, building upon the long-term disaster risk reduction programmes that we have already in place, where we're working with community disaster and climate change committees who already have women and men represented on those. So we took all the learnings from Cyclone Pam, from Cyclone Gita, from Cyclone Winston, and looked at how we could employer responses to meet the needs of the people. If we can go to the next slide, please, Ross. And then we looked at the evaluation of that. So after Cyclone Pam, we conducted a gender and DRR study, which did a comparison of communities where CARE had worked and communities where we hadn't. And then the communities where we had worked, we'd been working with community disaster and climate change committees that had men and women on them, and in communities where we hadn't, they either didn't have a committee, or if they did, it was all male-led. And it came back with amazing results in terms of the committees that had women on them, where CARE had already been working with these committees, with village leaders, felt that they were better prepared. Women knew where to go when the cyclone was coming. They had a voice in their own response. Men felt that the burden of the response wasn't on them, that it was a community response, and they felt that that as a collective, they were working much more in partnership compared to those where they hadn't been. And so we built on that and continued that program. So when Cyclone Harold hit, we had community committees in place. We had village leader relationships already in place. We had relationships with government in place. So we're able to build on all of that to make sure that their voice was in their response action. And so any response that took place was what the community had asked of them via the Community Disaster and Climate Change Committee. The Vanuatu Association of NGOs conducted an evaluation in partnership with the Humanitarian Advisory Group of the Cyclone Harold response, and I'll just read out some of the key findings from that. It noted the response that national and local actors stepped up to demonstrate that humanitarian local leadership is more than an aspiration in the Pacific. However, funding for that response was a lot less than it was for Cyclone Pam. 3/4 of respondents felt the response was nationally led. The Cyclone Harold response was more appropriate to the need and more relevant than they'd seen in Cyclone Pam, and that it drew on traditional structures and knowledge. However, the assistance was not regarded as timely. Some communities did not receive shelter support even after 2 months, and some did, noting, however, that of course the logistics in these Pacific Islands is very tricky. more Ni Vanuatu participants allowed for greater space of local voice by having more Ni Vanuatu in the room that allows for that. And I do remember after Cyclone Pam, the Gender and Protection Cluster in particular being completely overran by internationals and really losing its voice and that space to lobby for women, people with disabilities. 73% of international actors felt that they were respecting national leadership structures. However, 53% of national actors felt that they weren't. So there was a disconnect in the perceptions, and that the remote support and capacity strengthening increased, as did the local recruitment. So really positive outcomes. And what Cyclone Harold did, as our COVID responses in countries where we don't have an office, has demonstrated that, of course, there is national capacity in place. National actors are able to support, and that actually us as an international entities need to relook at what our role is. I'll finish there and I'll hand over to Peter to conclude the session.
Thank you so much, Charlie. And look, we have got a hard finish and I think it just cuts off, but I think we've got a few minutes and can perhaps go 5 minutes over. So we have time for question and answers. There were 2 related questions in the text which Celeste has begun to answer, but it'd be great to maybe put one of those back to you, Charlie, which was, how do you influence local or district or even national authorities to encourage women to lead in humanitarian works in the future? And I guess linked to that, a question from Nigel Spence. Hi, Nigel. To what extent is the process and the women's action plans able to get buy-in from government and other local institutions? You know, we're talking about changing social norms. There's no silver bullet.
No, so I would say, I mean, there is no silver bullet, but also technology, it takes a number of years. And so when you're doing a humanitarian response, you should be building on pre-existing disaster risk reduction or gender programs where you already have those established relationships in place with national actors and district actors, and you have those established relationships with community, because then it's a journey and you're taking everyone on a journey, and that's how you get buy-in. If you launch in never been there before and start talking about women's voice and women's rights, you might get shut down. But if you it's like any kind of relationship. You start to date, and then you slowly build up the confidence, the trust and relationship, and that's how you get in there and involve. I mean, it's really around decision makers feeling like they're being part of the decision as well.
And Celeste, for you, what big changes are you seeing in communities, especially arising from the work with schools?
Sorry, I cannot start my video, so I will just stick to my audio. Can I? Okay, here. Hi, can everyone hear me clearly?
Yep, go ahead, Celeste.
Well, technically, the big changes that we've been seeing in the communities is their own personal growth, from being plainly housewives to being able to realize that they can actually participate, especially in community decision making. And of course, in schools, there are more women who are eager to put their children in schools because they find that education is such an investment, and through education can they be empowered and more informed and be able to have access to different resources and connections so that they can have and they can enjoy public decision-making participation.
That's great. Look, we've got 1 minute, so I think I'm just going to occupy that by saying a very, very big thank you to our panelists today, to Charlie and also to Celeste. I think we started by saying this is about the intersection of locally led, but also gender equality. And I think the examples that we have shared today really demonstrate the importance of those. And I guess the importance of actually seizing this pivotal moment in terms of as local as possible, as international as necessary aid, with calls for the sector to really understand and decolonize and shift power, really looking at what anti-racism truly means, but also how we do genuinely shift the dial in terms of international support being less and less needed as something we should aspire to. I often remark, if 100 international organizations landed on Australia at the time of our bushfires and started dictating things, we'd be pretty alarmed. So why are we not aspiring for that not to be the case in other countries where we work? So a big, big thank you to everyone today. And, thank you to all of the audience for attending. I hope you found this session really informative and provocative. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists for this session. The final session of today is just about to start. It's the final keynote presentation. You'll find that in the agenda, but thanks again to all of our presenters
That's great. Thanks, Adam, for your support.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the last session, and we'll see you all tomorrow.
Okay, bye-bye.